The woman with copper hair rode into the canyon at dawn, her horses' hooves striking rock where sensible folk knew better than to venture. And Harrison Jameson watched from his camp with a confusion that turned quickly to alarm when he realized she was heading straight into territory even the Kiowa avoided. It was 1878, and the Texas Panhandle was unforgiving to those who knew its ways, let alone a woman who seemed determined to carve a path through stone and sand where God himself had not bothered to make one. Harrison threw his coffee into the fire, saddled his horse with practiced speed, and followed without understanding why, only knowing that something in the set of her shoulders and the deliberate way she guided her mare told him she was not lost, but rather finding something no one else could see. The canyon walls rose red and ancient around them, the early light turning the stone to flame. Harrison kept his distance, not wanting to startle her, but also not willing to let her disappear into the maze of arroyos and dead ends that had claimed more than one traveler. His horse, a steady buckskin gelding named Ranger, picked his way carefully over the loose shale, and Harrison found himself trusting the woman's path even as his own experience told him they were heading toward nothing but trouble. She did not look back, not once, though he knew she must have heard him. Her posture remained straight, her hands light on the reins, and her horse moved with the confidence of an animal being guided by someone who knew exactly where they were going. The trail she made was impossible over ledges Harrison would have sworn were too narrow, through gaps in the rock he would have missed entirely, around outcroppings that seemed to open up only at the last moment. He followed, his skepticism warring with a growing fascination. They rode for 3 hours before she finally stopped at a place where a spring bubbled up from between two massive boulders, creating a pool of clear water surrounded by wild grass and a single twisted cottonwood tree. She dismounted gracefully, removed her hat, and finally turned to look at him. "You have been following me since dawn," she said. Her voice was clear, educated with the faintest trace of an accent he could not quite place. "Do you make a habit of trailing women through dangerous country?" Harrison dismounted as well, keeping his hands visible and his manner respectful. "Do you make a habit of riding into canyons where even the vultures do not go?" he countered. She smiled at that, and it transformed her face from merely striking to genuinely beautiful. "I go where I need to go. The canyon is not dangerous if you know how to listen to it." "Listen to it," Harrison repeated, uncertain whether she was joking or mad or something else entirely. "The rock speaks," she said simply, as if this explained everything. "The water leaves traces. The wind carves patterns. If you pay attention, the land tells you where it wants you to walk." She knelt by the pool, cupped her hands, and drank deeply. "My name is Olivia Monroe. I am a geologist." Harrison had heard the word before but had never met anyone who claimed the title. "Harrison Jameson. I am a cowboy, or I was until the ranch I worked went under last month. Now I am just a man with a horse and no particular place to be." Olivia stood, water dripping from her fingers. "Then perhaps you would like to continue following me, Harrison Jameson. I am mapping a route from the Red River to Concordia, Kansas, and I could use someone who knows how to handle himself in rough country." "Kansas," Harrison said. "That is a long way from here." 400 miles, give or take," Olivia agreed. "But I believe there is a route no one has properly documented. One that avoids the worst of the settlements and stays to high ground where water can be found if you know where to look. The railroad companies would pay handsomely for such information, and more importantly, settlers moving west need reliable trails." Harrison studied her for a long moment. She wore practical clothing, split riding skirts, a leather vest over a simple cotton shirt, boots that had seen hard use. Her copper hair was pulled back in a thick braid, and her green eyes met his without flinching. She was sunburned across her nose and cheeks, and her hands showed calluses from holding reins and handling rock samples. This was no foolish city woman playing at adventure. This was someone serious about her work, perhaps serious enough to get herself killed if she went alone. "I will follow you," he said. "But I want to know why you are really doing this. Railroad money is good, but you do not strike me as someone motivated purely by profit." Olivia's smile faded slightly. "My brother was a surveyor. He died 2 years ago trying to map a route through the Staked Plains. His maps were lost with him, and the company blamed him for his own death, said he was reckless and incompetent. I am going to prove that the route exists, that he was right, and that better trails can be found if people are willing to look beyond the obvious paths." There was pain in her voice, old pain that had hardened into determination. Harrison understood that kind of motivation. He had his own ghosts, his own reasons for being alone in the canyon country with nowhere particular to go. "Then we had better get started," he said. "How do you want to do this?" Olivia pulled a leather-bound journal from her saddlebag, along with a compass, a sextant, and several other instruments Harrison recognized but could not name. "I take measurements, make sketches, note water sources and landmarks. You keep us alive, hunt when we need food, and help me when the terrain gets difficult. We travel mostly in early morning and late afternoon, rest during the heat of the day. We should reach Concordia in 6 weeks if my calculations are correct." 6 weeks alone in the wilderness, with a woman he had just met, should have seemed like either a disaster waiting to happen or an impossible temptation. Instead, it felt oddly right, as if the canyon had led them both to this moment for reasons neither of them fully understood yet. They set out that afternoon, following Olivia's path northward through country Harrison thought he knew but saw with new eyes as she pointed out the subtle signs she used for navigation. The angle of sedimentary layers in the canyon walls told her which direction water would flow. The types of plants indicated where underground springs might surface. The patterns of erosion showed which routes would be passable year-round versus those that would flood or become impassable in bad weather. "You see that notch in the ridge?" she asked, pointing to what looked like a random gap in the skyline. "That was cut by wind coming from the northwest. It means the ridge is lower there, probably because the rock is softer. If we head for that notch, we will likely find an easier crossing than trying to go over the higher sections." Harrison followed her reasoning, and sure enough, when they reached the ridge 2 hours later, they found a natural ramp of crumbled stone that took them up and over with minimal difficulty. On the far side, the land opened into a broad valley dotted with mesquite and cactus, and in the distance, a line of green marked another water source. They made camp that night beside a creek lined with willows. Harrison shot a jackrabbit and roasted it over a small fire while Olivia made notes in her journal by the fading light. The stars emerged in their thousands, undimmed by any town lights, and the air cooled quickly as it always did in the high desert. "Tell me about your brother," Harrison said as they ate. It seemed important to understand what drove her, to know the ghost she was chasing across the wilderness. Olivia was quiet for a moment, her face shadowed. "Thomas was 5 years older than me. He taught me to read topographical maps when I was 8 years old. We would go on long walks around our family's farm in Missouri, and he would show me how to tell the age of rock formations, how to identify minerals, how to understand the bones of the earth beneath the soil. When he went to university, I begged to go with him, but of course women were not admitted to the geology program. So he brought me every book he could find, and we corresponded constantly. He told me everything he learned." She poked at the fire with a stick, sending up sparks. When he got the surveying job, he was so excited. He wrote me letters about the vastness of the plains, the strange beauty of the desert, the challenge of finding routes through impossible terrain. Then the letters stopped. 6 months later, I received a brief note from the railroad company informing me that he had died of dehydration after losing his way in the Llano Estacado. They included a bill for the equipment he had lost. Harrison felt anger rise in his chest at the callousness of it. They charged you for equipment when your brother died in their service. They claimed he had been negligent, that a competent surveyor would never have gotten lost. But I knew Thomas. He was careful, methodical, brilliant. If he died, it was because he was trying to find something important, trying to push beyond the known trails. So I decided to finish his work. I spent 2 years studying everything I could find about the geology and geography of this region. I saved every penny from working as a teacher. And 6 months ago, I headed west to prove that the trails exist, that my brother was right. The firelight played across her face, highlighting the determination in her eyes. Harrison found himself moved by her loyalty, her refusal to let her brother's memory be tarnished by corporate indifference. "I am sorry about your brother," he said quietly, "but I am glad you decided to make this journey. Not many people have the courage to chase the trail someone else started." Olivia looked at him, and something in her expression softened. "What about you, Harrison Jameson? What trail are you chasing?" Harrison considered deflecting, keeping his past to himself as he usually did. But something about the night, the isolation, and the honesty she had shown him made him want to share. "I grew up on a ranch in southern Texas," he said. "My father was a hard man, quick with his fists and quicker with judgment. I left when I was 16 and have been working cattle drives and ranch jobs ever since. I am good at what I do, riding, roping, reading weather and cattle, but I never stayed anywhere long. Never wanted to put down roots, because I kept thinking there must be something more than just following the same trails year after year, working for men who care more about profit than people." He paused, surprised by how much he had revealed. "When the last ranch failed, I found myself relieved instead of worried. It felt like a door opening instead of one closing. Then I saw you riding into that canyon, making your own trail, and something in me said to follow. So I did." Olivia smiled. "A cowboy without a trail and a geologist making new ones. Perhaps we are well matched for this journey." They fell into a companionable silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts as the fire burned down to coals. Harrison took first watch while Olivia wrapped herself in her bedroll, and he found himself watching the stars and thinking about trails, both the ones carved into the earth and the ones people made through their lives. He had followed other people's paths for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to choose his own direction. Following Olivia felt different, not like submission but like collaboration, like finding someone whose trail aligned with something he had been searching for without knowing it. The days that followed established a rhythm between them. They would rise before dawn, ride through the cool morning hours while Olivia took her measurements and made her notes. When the sun grew too fierce, they would find shade and rest through the midday heat, and Harrison would watch Olivia sketch rock formations and vegetation patterns with quick, sure strokes. In the late afternoon, they would ride again until dark, then make camp and share stories over small fires. Harrison found himself constantly surprised by Olivia's knowledge and her way of seeing the land. Where he saw only obstacles, a dry wash, a steep slope, a maze of gullies, she saw opportunities and information. She could read the layers of stone like pages in a book, telling him how ancient seas had covered this land, how mountains had risen and eroded away, how wind and water had sculpted the terrain over millions of years. The wilderness became richer under her gaze, more complex and fascinating than he had ever imagined. For her part, Olivia came to rely on Harrison's practical skills and his instinctive understanding of survival in harsh country. He knew how to find the best campsites, places sheltered from wind with access to water and good grazing for the horses. He could read animal tracks and predict weather from the behavior of birds and insects. When Olivia's theoretical knowledge met practical obstacles, Harrison found ways to make her vision work, rigging ropes to help them descend a cliff face, building a travois to cross a stretch of sand too soft for the horses to carry full loads. They talked for hours each evening, sharing not just stories but ideas and dreams. Olivia told him about the new science of geology, about theories of how the Earth changed over vast periods of time, about the excitement of discovering patterns in nature that no one had recognized before. Harrison found himself drawn into her enthusiasm, asking questions, offering observations from his years of travel that she incorporated into her understanding. In turn, he told her about the ranching life, about the satisfaction of working with animals and land, about the beauty of a successful cattle drive and the camaraderie of a good crew. He told her things he had never articulated before: how he loved the openness of the West, the sense of space and possibility, but also felt adrift in it, lacking the anchor of purpose that she carried so clearly in her work. "You have more purpose than you credit yourself with," Olivia said one evening as they camped beside a spring-fed pond reflecting the sunset. "You chose to follow me without knowing why. You chose to help me complete my work. Those are not the actions of a man without direction." "I followed you because something told me I should," Harrison admitted. "But I did not know what I was following toward. I still do not, entirely." Olivia set down her journal and looked at him directly, her green eyes catching the last light. "Perhaps you are following towards something you have never had before: a partnership, a shared purpose. Perhaps you are following toward me." The words hung in the air between them, and Harrison felt his heartbeat quicken. They had been dancing around the growing attraction between them for days now, the long hours of conversation and shared hardship creating a bond that felt both profound and fragile. He wanted to reach across the space between them, to touch her hand or her face, to acknowledge what was building. But he also feared breaking the delicate balance they had achieved, feared imposing himself on her when she had trusted him to be a safe companion in dangerous country. "I would like that," he said carefully, "following toward you, but I do not want to assume anything or make you uncomfortable. You hired me to help with your work, not to complicate your life." Olivia laughed softly. "Harrison, I did not hire you. I invited you to accompany me. There is a difference, and you have already complicated my life in the best possible way." She moved closer, closing the distance between them until they sat side by side on the fallen log they had dragged near the fire. "I have spent 2 years focused entirely on this journey, on proving myself and honoring my brother. I did not expect to find someone who would understand what I am doing, who would see the land the way I see it, who would make me laugh and feel less alone. But I have found that person. I have found you." Harrison turned to face her fully, and in her expression he saw the same mixture of hope and uncertainty he felt himself. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he reached up and touched her cheek with his calloused fingers. She leaned into the touch, and then she kissed him, and the world narrowed to the warmth of her lips and the scent of sage in her hair and the vast starlit sky above them. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing harder, Olivia rested her forehead against his. "I want you to know that this is not some foolish impulse born of isolation. I have thought about this, about you, for days now, and I believe my brother would have liked you very much. I wish I could have met him," Harrison said, meaning it deeply. But I am grateful his path led you to where our paths crossed. They sat together in the firelight, hands intertwined, and talked late into the night about what this meant, where it could lead, whether it was wise or reckless or simply right. Eventually, they agreed that they would continue the journey as planned, but now as partners in every sense, seeing where the trail took them both geographically and emotionally. The next 3 weeks transformed the journey from an expedition into something closer to a pilgrimage. They were no longer just mapping a route but building a relationship, learning each other's rhythms and preferences, discovering how to work together and support each other through challenges. When Olivia grew frustrated with a particularly difficult set of measurements that refused to make sense, Harrison would suggest they take a break, and he would point out some small beauty in their surroundings: a hawk riding a thermal, a cluster of wildflowers growing improbably from a crack in solid rock, until her tension eased and she could return to her work with fresh eyes. When Harrison grew restless or withdrawn, slipping into dark moods that he traced back to his difficult childhood, Olivia would ask him to tell her about the best moments of his work, the times he had felt most alive and capable. She would listen without judgment as he worked through his feelings, and her steady presence helped him see that his past did not have to define his future. They crossed from Texas into the Oklahoma Territory and then into Kansas, the land gradually shifting from high desert to rolling grasslands. Olivia's route stayed to the high ground where creeks ran reliably, and timber grew in protected valleys, avoiding both the densest settlements and the most barren stretches. It was a route that balanced accessibility with practicality, offering water and game for travelers, while avoiding the dangers of lowlands that could flood or highlands that would be impassable in winter. They encountered other travelers occasionally, a family of settlers heading west, a small hunting party of Osage men who shared information about water sources ahead, a circuit preacher riding alone with his Bible and his faith. Each time, Harrison watched how Olivia interacted with people, noting her combination of friendliness and reserve, her ability to extract useful information while sharing enough of their purpose to seem trustworthy. He realized she had a gift for navigation not just of landscape but of social situations, knowing when to talk and when to listen, when to push forward and when to pause. One evening, as they camped beside a creek within sight of Concordia, Kansas, the end of their journey just 2 days away, Olivia seemed quieter than usual. Harrison waited, not pushing, until she was ready to speak. "I am afraid," she said finally, her voice soft. "I have been working toward this goal for so long that I am not sure who I will be when I complete it. My entire purpose for 2 years has been finishing Thomas's work, proving his vision was sound. What happens when that is done?" Harrison moved to sit beside her, their shoulders touching in the gathering dark. "You will still be Olivia Monroe, brilliant geologist and trail maker. Completing this route does not end your purpose, it confirms it and opens up new possibilities. There are countless trails unmapped, countless routes that could benefit from your knowledge, and you will not be alone in finding them." Olivia turned to look at him, hope and uncertainty in her eyes. "Are you saying you want to continue traveling with me, even after we reach Concordia?" "I am saying more than that," Harrison said, taking her hands in his. "I am saying that somewhere along this trail I fell in love with you. I am saying that I do not want this journey to end with reaching Concordia. I want to keep making trails with you wherever they lead. I want to build a life that has room for both your work and whatever work. I find that gives me the same sense of purpose your geology gives you." Tears sparkled in Olivia's eyes, catching the firelight. "I fell in love with you too. I did not mean to. I thought I was too focused on my mission for such things. but you made me see that having a mission and having love are not incompatible. They make each other richer." They kissed then, a kiss that tasted of joy and relief and the thrill of new beginnings. When they finally pulled apart, both smiling, Olivia laughed and wiped at her eyes. "My very practical side feels I should mention that I have almost no money left after funding this expedition, and that my prospects for employment as a female geologist are uncertain at best." Harrison grinned. "My very practical side should mention that I have about $40 in savings and a horse. But I am a good worker, and people always need cowboys. And I think that between your brains and my brawn, we can make something work." "We will make it work," Olivia corrected, her voice firm with determination. "We have just crossed 400 miles of wilderness by finding a route where no clear route existed. We can certainly figure out how to make a living and a life together." They spent the rest of the evening planning, not in the rigid way of people trying to control every variable, but in the excited, overlapping way of partners envisioning a shared future. Olivia thought she could offer her services to railroad companies, or to settlers' organizations that helped people move west safely. Harrison could work as a guide or return to ranching, but with the difference that now he would be working toward a future he was building intentionally, rather than just drifting between jobs. They reached Concordia 2 days later, riding into the small but growing town in late afternoon. Concordia sat on the Republican River in north-central Kansas, positioned to serve both the railroad and the agricultural settlements spreading across the plains. It was larger than Harrison had expected, with several streets of businesses, a bank, 2 churches, and a newspaper office. The railroad ran through the center of town, and even in the declining afternoon, there was activity around the station as goods were loaded and unloaded. Olivia led them directly to the land office, where a clerk looked up in surprise at the appearance of a dusty, sun-weathered woman demanding to speak with the Surveyor General's representative. Harrison stood back and watched as Olivia presented her credentials, letters from scientists who had corresponded with her brother, her own detailed journals and maps, testimonials from the railroad companies that had employed Thomas. Her voice was clear and professional, brooking no dismissal. The clerk, a middle-aged man named Mr. Patterson, listened with growing interest as Olivia explained her route and the methodology she had used. He asked detailed questions about water sources, about the gradient of various sections, about accessibility in different seasons. Olivia answered each question precisely, referencing her notes and sketches, occasionally asking Harrison to confirm details about game availability or grazing quality from his cowboy's perspective. Finally, Mr. Patterson leaned back in his chair and regarded them both with something approaching respect. "Miss Monroe, what you have done is genuinely impressive. The government has been seeking reliable high-ground routes from Texas to Kansas for years now. If your maps are as accurate as they appear, this could save lives and facilitate settlement in ways that would benefit thousands of people." "My maps are accurate," Olivia said firmly. "I would stake my reputation and my life on them, and in fact, I already have. Mr. Jameson and I just traveled the entire route." Mr. Patterson nodded slowly. "I will need to verify the information, of course, and that will take time. But I can offer you a preliminary payment for your work today, and if the route proves out as I expect it will, there will be significantly more compensation coming. The government also employs surveyors and guides for new routes. If you were interested in such work, I believe arrangements could be made." Olivia glanced at Harrison, and he saw the triumph and validation in her eyes. This was what she had worked for, what her brother had died trying to achieve. I would be very interested in such work, Mr. Patterson. And I believe Mr. Jameson's expertise would be valuable as well. By the time they left the land office an hour later, Olivia had a bank draft in her pocket substantial enough to fund several months of comfortable living, and they had preliminary agreements for future work, pending verification of the route. They also had letters of introduction to several other organizations that might employ their combined skills. They found rooms at a boarding house run by a kind widow named Mrs. Henderson, who clucked over their travel-worn appearance and insisted on providing them with hot baths and a substantial meal. That evening, clean and fed and sleeping in actual beds for the first time in 6 weeks, both slept deeply and dreamlessly. The next few days were spent in Concordia, outfitting themselves properly, sending telegrams, and beginning the process of establishing themselves in the town. Olivia purchased new surveying equipment to replace items worn out during the journey. Harrison bought new clothes and gear, no longer looking like a drifting cowboy but like a man with purpose and prospects. They attended church on Sunday, more to become known in the community than from any deep religious conviction, and after the service, several people approached them with interest. Word had spread about the woman geologist and her route mapping, and the townsfolk were curious about these unusual newcomers. Olivia handled the attention with grace, answering questions while subtly establishing her credentials and competence. Harrison found himself introduced as her partner and guide, a designation that made him stand a bit taller with pride. That evening, as they sat on the porch of the boarding house watching the sunset paint the Kansas sky in shades of orange and purple, Harrison broached a subject that had been on his mind since they arrived. "Olivia, I want to marry you," he said directly. "Not because propriety demands it, though being an unmarried woman traveling with a man will limit your opportunities. Not because I want to control your work or your choices, but because I love you and I want us to build this life as husband and wife, as true partners. I want whatever we accomplish to be ours together." Olivia turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face. "I want that too, but I need you to understand that I cannot be a traditional wife. I cannot spend my days cooking and cleaning and caring for a house while you go out into the world. My work is too important to me." "I do not want a traditional wife," Harrison assured her. "I want you, exactly as you are brilliant, determined, passionate about your work. We will figure out how to make a household that serves both our needs. Maybe we hire someone to help with domestic chores so you can focus on your maps and I can focus on my work. Maybe we live somewhat unconventionally by the standards of people like Mrs. Henderson. I do not care about convention. I care about you and about building something real." A slow smile spread across Olivia's face. "Then yes, Harrison Jameson, I will marry you, and I promise to be an excellent wife by our own definition, even if I am a terrible one by society's standards." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Methodist Church, with Mr. Patterson and Mrs. Henderson serving as witnesses. Olivia wore a simple but elegant green dress that brought out her eyes, and Harrison wore the best suit he had ever owned. The preacher, Reverend Thompson, had initially balked at marrying a couple so unconventional, but Olivia's quiet assertion that her work was no less worthy in God's eyes than any man's had won him over. After the ceremony, they hosted a small reception at the boarding house where they served cake and lemonade to the handful of people they had befriended in their short time in Concordia. It was not the grand wedding either of their mothers might have dreamed of, but it felt right intimate, honest, and focused on the commitment they were making rather than on show. Their wedding night was spent in a small house they had rented on the edge of town, a 2-room structure with a good well and a shed for the horses. It was hardly luxurious, but it was theirs, and that made it beautiful. Harrison carried Olivia over the threshold, both of them laughing at the traditionalism of the gesture in the midst of their unconventional lives. And then they made love for the first time as husband and wife, slowly and tenderly, learning each other's bodies with the same careful attention they had learned each other's minds during their journey. Afterward, lying tangled together in the bed, Olivia traced patterns on Harrison's chest with her fingertips. "I never thought I could have this," she said softly. "I thought I had to choose between my work and a real partnership with someone, but you make me believe I can have both." Harrison kissed her forehead. "We will make sure you have both. That was always the promise of the West, was it not? That you could build a life different from what was expected, that you could find new trails and follow them wherever they led." Over the following months, they built exactly that kind of life. Olivia's route was officially verified and incorporated into government maps, bringing her considerable recognition in surveying circles. She received commissions to map other routes, and Harrison traveled with her on most of them, serving as guide, assistant, and partner. The work took them all over Kansas and into neighboring territories, always returning to their small house in Concordia as a home base. Harrison also found work he valued, not just as a cowboy, but as a consultant to ranchers establishing herds in new territory. His years of experience combined with Olivia's geological knowledge of water sources and grazing land made them a formidable team. They helped several ranching operations establish themselves in sustainable locations, and Harrison felt the satisfaction of knowing his expertise was genuinely valued rather than just purchased for temporary labor. Their unconventional marriage raised eyebrows among some of the more traditional townsfolk, but most people came to respect their partnership once they saw the quality of their work and the evident love between them. Mrs. Henderson became a particular ally, often defending Olivia to other women who questioned why she did not stay home like a proper wife. "That girl has more sense in her little finger than most men have in their whole bodies," Mrs. Henderson would say firmly. "And her husband is wise enough to recognize it. They are doing important work that will help people for generations. Any fool can keep house, but not everyone can map the wilderness." A year and a half after their marriage, Olivia discovered she was pregnant. The news brought both joy and concern: joy at the prospect of creating a family together, concern about how it would affect her work. She was in the middle of mapping a route through western Kansas, and the thought of having to stop filled her with frustration. Harrison, however, surprised her with his response. "You will keep working as long as you feel able," he said firmly. "And after the baby comes, we will figure out how to continue. Maybe we bring the child with us on shorter expeditions. Maybe we hire help so you can travel while I stay with the baby sometimes. Maybe we adjust our approach but not our commitment to the work. We will make it work, Olivia. We always do." His confidence steadied her, and she continued surveying through her 6th month of pregnancy, only stopping when the physical demands became too challenging. Even then, she worked from home, compiling her notes into detailed reports and corresponding with other geologists about theories and findings. Their son was born on a stormy night in April 1880, delivered by the town doctor with Mrs. Henderson assisting. Harrison paced the kitchen anxiously until he heard the baby's first cry, and then he was allowed into the bedroom to meet his child. The boy was red-faced and squalling, and Harrison thought he was the most perfect thing he had ever seen besides Olivia herself. "Thomas," Olivia said softly, cradling the infant, "for my brother, Thomas Henry Jameson." Harrison felt his throat tighten with emotion. "He would be honored, and I am honored to raise a son with you." Little Thomas proved to be a healthy, curious baby who seemed fascinated by the world around him from his earliest days. When Olivia returned to work 4 months after his birth, they experimented with different arrangements until they found a pattern that worked. Mrs. Henderson and a young woman named Sarah helped care for Thomas when both parents needed to travel, and when possible, they took him with them on easier expeditions. Thomas grew up seeing his mother take measurements and sketch maps, hearing his parents discuss geology and ranching, learning that women and men could be partners in all things. 2 years later, a daughter joined the family, named Catherine Iris after Harrison's mother, a woman he had barely known but whom Olivia insisted deserved recognition. Catherine was quieter than her brother, more observant, and she seemed to inherit Olivia's gift for seeing patterns in the natural world. The years passed in a rhythm of work and family, of expeditions and homecomings, of challenges met and overcome. Olivia's reputation grew beyond Kansas, and she was invited to present papers at scientific gatherings in St. Louis and Chicago. She always brought Harrison with her, introducing him as her partner in every sense, and his practical knowledge proved valuable in discussions that otherwise might have remained purely theoretical. Harrison, for his part, became known as one of the most knowledgeable guides and ranching consultants in the region. He was sought after not just for his skills, but for his integrity and his willingness to listen to new ideas. Young cowboys looked up to him, and he found himself mentoring several who reminded him of his younger self, talented but adrift, seeking purpose beyond the next paycheck. Their marriage deepened with the years, the initial passionate attraction maturing into something richer and more complex, a partnership built on shared values, mutual respect, and the daily choice to support each other's dreams. They argued sometimes, usually about the best approach to a problem or how to balance competing demands on their time, but they had learned to fight fairly and to remember that they were on the same side. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they returned to the place where they had first kissed, the spring-fed pond in the canyon country of the Texas Panhandle. They left the children with Mrs. Henderson, now like a grandmother to the family, and retraced the route Olivia had pioneered so long ago. The trail was more established now, used regularly by travelers following the maps Olivia had created, but it still held its wild beauty. They camped beside the pond, and as the sun set and the stars emerged, Harrison pulled Olivia close. "Do you ever regret following that trail?" he asked. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if I had not followed you that morning?" Olivia laughed softly. "I do not regret a single moment. Following my brother's dream led me to you, and following you led me to a life richer than I could have imagined. We made trails where no trails had been, Harrison, and not just across the land. We made a trail through life that is entirely our own." "And I followed you without question," Harrison said. "Best decision I ever made." They sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the wilderness, the same sounds that had accompanied their first journey together. So much had changed since then. They had built a home, created a family, established careers that mattered to them. But the essential truth remained the same. They were partners, trail makers, people who chose their own paths and helped each other navigate them. The following year brought new opportunities and new challenges. The railroad companies offered Olivia a substantial contract to map potential routes through the Rocky Mountains, a project that would take several years and require extensive travel. It was exactly the kind of challenge she loved, but it would mean significant time away from Concordia and the children. They discussed it for weeks, weighing the professional opportunity against family needs, considering different arrangements and possibilities. Finally, they decided that Olivia would accept the contract, but that they would approach it strategically. She would do intensive field work during the warmer months when travel was easier and children could potentially accompany them. And she would work from home during winter, compiling data and writing reports while being present for Thomas and Catherine. Harrison would adjust his own work accordingly, taking consulting jobs that kept him closer to home when Olivia was traveling, and traveling with her when the children could be safely left with trusted caregivers or brought along. It was not a perfect solution, but perfection had never been their goal. Making it work, honoring both their commitments to their work and their family, that was what mattered. The Rocky Mountain Project proved to be Olivia's masterwork. Over 3 years, she mapped 6 potential railroad routes through some of the most challenging terrain in North America. Her reports were so detailed, and her recommendations so sound that 2 of the routes were adopted almost exactly as she proposed them. The project brought financial security that allowed them to build a larger house in Concordia, one with a proper study for Olivia's work and room for their growing children. Thomas, at 12 years old, showed signs of inheriting both his parents' gifts, his mother's analytical mind and his father's practical skills. He could read a topographical map as easily as most children read storybooks, and he could rope a calf with developing proficiency. Catherine, at 10, displayed an artistic talent that manifested in beautiful sketches of geological formations and wildlife, combining scientific observation with aesthetic sensitivity. Both children understood that their family was unusual, that most of their friends had mothers who stayed home and fathers who had single, defined occupations. But they also understood that unusual was not bad, and that the love and partnership their parents modeled was something special. On a warm evening in June 1891, the entire family gathered on the porch of their Concordia home. Harrison had just returned from a successful ranching consultation, and Olivia had received word that her latest report on mineral resources in Colorado had been accepted for publication in a prestigious scientific journal. The children were playing checkers while the adults watched the sunset. "Tell us again how you met," Thomas requested, a familiar refrain. Both children loved hearing the story of their parents' first meeting, even though they had heard it dozens of times. Olivia exchanged a smile with Harrison, and he gestured for her to begin. She settled back in her rocking chair, Catherine leaning against her side, and started the story. "It was early morning in the Texas Canyon country," she said. "I was riding into territory most people thought was impassable, following rock formations and water signs that only I could read. I was on a mission to prove my brother's theories were sound, to map a route that would help people traveling west. And your father, being either very brave or very foolish, decided to follow me. I followed because I knew she was either going to do something amazing or get herself killed," Harrison interjected with a grin. "And either way, it seemed like something I should not miss. He followed me through canyons and over ridges, trusting my path even when it made no conventional sense," Olivia continued. "And at the end of that first day, we found a perfect spring beside ancient cottonwood trees, and we talked, and I realized I had found a partner for the journey. Not just the journey to Kansas, but the journey through life. And I realized I had found someone worth following," Harrison added. "Someone who saw trails where others saw only wilderness, who had the courage to go where no one had gone before. I fell in love with her determination first, and then with everything else about her." Catherine sighed happily. "It is the most romantic story. You made a trail where no trail had been, and Papa followed you without a question." "Actually, I had plenty of questions," Harrison laughed. "But I asked them while following, not instead of following. There is a difference. Thomas looked between his parents thoughtfully. Is that what love is? Following someone's trail even when you do not know where it leads? Olivia considered the question seriously. Partly, yes. Love is trusting someone enough to follow their path. But it is also making trails together, combining your strengths to create something neither of you could create alone. Your father and I followed each other in different ways at different times. Sometimes I led because I knew the geology. Sometimes he led because he knew the survival skills. We made our trail together. And we are still making it, Harrison added, reaching over to take Olivia's hand. Every day, we choose to keep building this life together, to support each other's dreams, to make trails for you children to follow or diverge from as you see fit. The sun sank below the horizon, painting the Kansas sky in brilliant colors. In the gathering darkness, fireflies began their dance, and from somewhere down the street came the sound of a fiddle playing a familiar tune. It was a peaceful moment, the kind that might seem ordinary but that Harrison and Olivia recognized as precious, their family together, healthy and happy, the fruit of all the trails they had followed and made. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed, Harrison and Olivia stood together in the yard, looking up at the stars. They were the same stars that had watched over their first journey together, the same stars that had guided countless travelers across the Western territories. "Do you think Thomas was right about what he said today?" Olivia asked. "Is that what our story teaches, to follow someone even when you do not know where the trail leads?" Harrison thought about it carefully. "I think our story teaches that the right trail is not always the obvious one. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts, or trust someone whose judgment you respect, and follow a path that makes no conventional sense. I followed you into that canyon because something in me recognized that you knew what you were doing, even if I could not see it yet. And I have followed you through our life together for the same reason, because you have vision and courage, and because following you has led me to places and experiences I never could have found on my own. And I followed your lead just as often," Olivia pointed out. "When I was so focused on my maps and measurements that I missed the human elements, you brought me back. When I was too rigid in my thinking, you showed me flexibility. When I forgot to rest or eat or notice the small beauties around us, you reminded me. We followed each other, Harrison. That is what made it work." Harrison pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling the solid reality of her in his arms. "We followed each other," he agreed. "And we made trails no one else could have made. That is a good life, Olivia, a very good life." She tilted her face up to kiss him, a kiss that held 15 years of partnership and love, all the challenges they had overcome and all the joys they had shared. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "Let us go inside," Olivia said. "Tomorrow I want to start planning our next expedition. I have been thinking about mapping some of the canyon country down in Arizona territory, and I would like your thoughts on the logistics." Harrison laughed. "Still making new trails even after all these years?" "Always," Olivia confirmed. "That is what we do. That is who we are." They walked back to the house together, hand in hand, two trail makers who had found each other in the wilderness and built a life as unconventional and beautiful as the landscape they loved. Behind them, the Kansas night settled soft and vast, and ahead of them stretched countless possibilities, countless trails yet to be made. Inside their home, the lamplight glowed warm. Olivia spread her maps across the large oak table Harrison had built for her, and they bent over the drawings together, planning their next adventure. Catherine had left a sketch on the corner of the table, a detailed drawing of a canyon wren that showed remarkable observation skills. Thomas had left a note asking if he could come on the next expedition, promising to help with measurements and camp duties. "We are raising trail makers," Harrison observed, looking at the evidence of their children's interests. "We are raising them to think for themselves, to see possibilities where others see limitations, to have the courage to follow their own paths," Olivia corrected gently. "Whether those paths involve geology or art or ranching or something entirely different, that is up to them. We are just showing them that unconventional trails are possible." Over the next several years, that is exactly what they did. Thomas did accompany them on several expeditions, learning field work that would later inform his decision to study civil engineering. Catherine developed her artistic talents while also absorbing her parents' love of the natural world, eventually becoming an illustrator for scientific publications. Both children grew up secure in the knowledge that they were loved and supported, that their parents' sometimes complicated relationship with work and travel was a strength rather than a weakness in their family. As Harrison and Olivia moved into their 40s, they began to shift their work slightly, taking on more consulting roles and fewer extensive field expeditions. Olivia trained several younger surveyors, both men and women, passing on her knowledge and methods. She became known not just for her own work but for her mentorship, for opening doors for other women interested in geology and surveying. Harrison, meanwhile, became increasingly involved in efforts to establish better trails and infrastructure for settlers. He worked with territorial governments and private organizations to create comprehensive guides for people moving west, combining practical information about routes with Olivia's geological insights about water sources and land quality. Their collaborative work helped thousands of families establish successful homesteads in challenging territory. In 1898, 20 years after they first met, Harrison and Olivia received an invitation to speak at a surveying conference in Denver. It was a major honor, recognition not just of Olivia's scientific contributions but of their partnership model. They traveled to Denver together, leaving Thomas, now 20 and attending university, and Catherine, now 18 and preparing for art school at home. The conference hall was filled with surveyors, geologists, railroad officials, and government representatives from across the Western territories. When Olivia was introduced, she received sustained applause, and when she acknowledged Harrison as her partner in all her work, the applause grew even louder. People were hungry for models of how to make unconventional partnerships work, how to honor both technical expertise and practical experience. Olivia's speech focused on methodology and findings, but at the end, she deviated from her prepared remarks. "I want to speak briefly about partnership," she said, her clear voice carrying through the hall. 20 years ago, I rode into a canyon determined to prove my brother's vision and my own capabilities. A cowboy named Harrison Jameson followed me, not because he understood my work, not because I asked him to, but because something told him it was the right thing to do. That instinct, that willingness to follow a trail that made no conventional sense, changed both our lives. She looked directly at Harrison, who sat in the front row. We made trails together where no trails had been. We combined my theoretical knowledge with his practical expertise. We challenged each other's assumptions and supported each other's dreams. We built a family and careers that honor both our abilities, and we did all of this by refusing to accept that there was only one right way to live or work or love. She paused, letting her words settle. I tell you this not to boast about our success, but to encourage you to look for partnerships that challenge convention. The West was built by people who made new trails, who went where others said it was impossible to go. We need to bring that same spirit to how we structure our work relationships, our marriages, our families, We need to follow the trails that our instincts tell us are right, even when they do not match the established paths. The applause that followed was thunderous. After the formal session ended, dozens of people approached them, young women who wanted to know how Olivia had established her career, young men who wanted to understand how Harrison supported his wife's unconventional work, couples who were struggling to balance two careers and family responsibilities. Harrison and Olivia spent hours talking with people, sharing not just success stories but honest accounts of challenges and compromises, of arguments and adjustments, of the ongoing work required to maintain a true partnership. That night, in their Denver hotel room, they reflected on the day. "Did you ever imagine this?" Olivia asked. "That our unconventional life would become something other people wanted to emulate?" Harrison shook his head. "I only ever imagined following you. Everything else came from that initial decision to trust you, to partner with you, to build something new together. But I am glad our story helps others. If even a few couples find the courage to build partnerships that honor both people's gifts, then all our struggles were worthwhile." They returned to Concordia energized, with new consulting opportunities and a renewed sense of purpose. But they also returned with a growing awareness that they were entering a new phase of life. Thomas was establishing his own career. Catherine was preparing to leave for art school. The house that had been filled with children's laughter and questions would soon be quieter. "What is our next trail?" Harrison asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching another Kansas sunset. "When the children are fully launched into their own lives, what trails do we make then?" Olivia leaned against him, comfortable in the familiar warmth of his presence. "I have been thinking about that. I would like to write a comprehensive guide to geological surveying in the American West, something that combines technical information with practical application. It would be a large project, requiring us to revisit many of the places we have worked over the years." "A retrospective journey," Harrison said, liking the idea. "We could retrace our first route, see how the trails we made have been used and modified over time." "Exactly. And I would want you to contribute chapters on practical survival and navigation, on reading weather and understanding animal behavior as indicators of water and good camping sites. Our combined knowledge could create something genuinely useful for the next generation of surveyors and settlers." They spent the next year planning this project, and when Catherine departed for art school in the fall of 1899, they began their retrospective journey. Starting in the Texas Panhandle Canyon where they had first met, they slowly retraced the route to Concordia, documenting changes, taking new measurements, interviewing people who had used the trails Olivia had mapped. The journey took 6 months, and it was like a second honeymoon infused with the depth of 2 decades of partnership. They revisited campsites where they had first fallen in love, saw how seasonal variations affected the trails, discovered improvements that local people had made based on Olivia's original route. They also confronted their own aging. They were both in their mid-40s now, no longer young but not yet old, still vigorous but more aware of physical limitations than they had been 20 years earlier. "We are becoming the older generation," Olivia observed one evening as they camped beside the same spring where Harrison had first told her he loved her. "The young surveyors and cowboys we meet look at us as experienced elders, not peers." Harrison chuckled. "We are experienced elders. And that is not a bad thing. We have knowledge worth sharing, mistakes we can help others avoid, successes they can learn from. Getting older is just another trail to navigate, and we will do it the way we have done everything else together." The book they produced from this journey, published in 1901 under both their names, became a standard reference work for Western surveying. It combined rigorous scientific methodology with practical wisdom, theoretical knowledge with ground-level experience. The fact that it was authored jointly by a husband and wife team, with equal credit given to both partners' contributions, was noted favorably in every review. The royalties from the book provided financial security for their later years, allowing them to be selective about the work they took on. Harrison focused on mentoring young ranchers and cowboys, passing on the skills and knowledge he had accumulated over 4 decades in the West. Olivia continued to consult on major surveying projects, but spent more time on research and writing, contributing papers to scientific journals, and corresponding with geologists around the world. Thomas married in 1903 to a schoolteacher named Margaret, and they settled in Denver, where his engineering career was flourishing. Catherine married a fellow artist in 1905, and they established a studio in Santa Fe where they created illustrations and paintings inspired by southwestern landscapes. Both children visited Concordia regularly, bringing grandchildren who listened wide-eyed to stories of their grandparents' adventures. As Harrison and Olivia entered their 50s and then their 60s, their love deepened into something more profound than the passionate attraction of their younger years. It became a companionship so natural and essential that they could hardly imagine existing separately. They knew each other's thoughts before they were spoken, could work together in comfortable silence, could find joy in simple moments of shared existence. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1909, they held a large celebration in Concordia. Thomas and Catherine came with their families. Mrs. Henderson, now elderly but still sharp, presided over the festivities. Former colleagues, surveyors whose careers Olivia had influenced, ranchers Harrison had helped, all gathered to celebrate a partnership that had reshaped not just landscapes but ideas about what was possible. During the celebration, Thomas stood to offer a toast. "My parents taught me that the best trails are the ones you make yourself. That partnership means honoring each other's strengths, and that love is choosing each day to support someone else's journey while pursuing your own. They showed me what it means to be brave enough to follow an unconventional path. They made a trail where no trail had been, and they did it together. To Harrison and Olivia Jameson, may their trail continue long and happy." Everyone raised their glasses, and in that moment, surrounded by the fruits of 30 years of partnership, children, grandchildren, colleagues, friends, work that had changed how people moved through and understood the West, Harrison and Olivia felt the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. They continued working into their 70s, though at a gentler pace. Their house in Concordia became a gathering place for anyone interested in geology, surveying, Western history, or simply good conversation. Young women considering scientific careers sought Olivia's advice. Young men uncertain about their paths found mentorship from Harrison. The trail they had made through their lives became a path others could learn from, even if each person ultimately had to forge their own way. In 1918, as World War I ended and America entered a new era, Harrison and Olivia sat together on their porch watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before. They were both 71 years old, weathered by decades of sun and wind, their bodies no longer strong enough for long expeditions, but their minds still sharp and engaged. "You ever regret it?" Harrison asked, the question that had become a ritual between them. "Following that trail I made through the canyon," Olivia smiled, the same answer she always gave but meaning it as deeply as ever. "Not for one single moment. You gave me partnership, love, and a life richer than I could have imagined. You helped me finish my brother's work and then build my own legacy. You made me laugh and held me when I cried and believed in me when I doubted myself. Following that trail led me to everything that matters. And I would follow you again, Harrison said. I would follow you into any canyon, over any ridge, through any wilderness. Following you has been the privilege of my life. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged, the same stars that had watched over their first journey together 40 years ago. They had made trails where no trails had been. They had loved deeply and worked meaningfully. They had raised children who knew the value of choosing their own paths. They had left the world better than they found it. Their story, which had begun with a woman making a bold trail and a cowboy following without question, had become something larger, a testament to what partnership could achieve, to what love could build, to what courage and determination could create. It was a story as vast and beautiful as the western landscapes they had spent their lives mapping, and it would continue to inspire long after they were gone, carried forward by the trails they had made and the people they had touched. And as they sat together in the gathering darkness, hands intertwined as they had been for 40 years, they knew that the greatest trail they had made was not carved into the earth at all, but rather lived in the hearts of everyone who had learned from their example that love and partnership could take forms as varied and magnificent as the western wilderness itself, limited only by the courage to imagine something new and the commitment to follow through together.